Hello, I'm Chris Slight, the editor of International Construction magazine.
And I'm Helen Wright, the deputy editor.
And welcome to the podcast that goes with our May 2014 edition. In this month's podcast, we're going to look at one of our news stories about forecasts for the global construction equipment industry. We're going to look at the proposed merger between Lafarge and Holcim in the construction materials sector. And we're also going to look at features on Latin America and the utilities sector. But first of all, Helen, in the news this month, specialist consultant Off-Highway Research forecast an increase in global construction equipment sales this year. So what's the story?
First, let's be clear what we mean by global. Off-Highway Research's figures cover China, Europe, India, Japan and North America, so some very big markets. And it expects sales in these regions to grow 5% in unit terms. And all 5 of those key regions are expected to see increases, with Japan leading the way in percentage terms, and the last time that happened was in 2004.
So with all these 5 regions forecast to grow this year, that represents quite a rebound from last year when sales fell about 1% across these regions.
Yes, that's right. In 2013, sales totalled 713,363 machines, and this year is expected to see more than 747,000 pieces of construction equipment sold across those 5 major markets. The turnaround in China is perhaps of most note, and that's after 3 years of declines. A 1.5% increase in volumes is expected in 2014 to 305,605 machines. But even though there is an increase here, the market will still be well below its stimulus-driven peak of 487,642 units, which was recorded in 2011.
And what about expectations for North America, which seems to be a region that's on the rise?
Absolutely. Off-Highway Research expects this year to be a 5th consecutive year of growth for North America. It's forecasting a 5.7% increase in unit sales, taking the equipment market to 162,660 machines for 2014. Elsewhere, Western European markets are also set for similar improvements this year, and that follows a 2-year dip, so good news for that region. Sales are expected to increase 4.5% in 2014 to 116,416 machines. Japan, as I said earlier, is expected to see quite high growth. It's a 5th consecutive year of double-digit increases in this country, with sales rising 12% in 2014 to a forecast of 101,718 machines. And that is the highest the market in Japan has been for some 20 years. Finally, in India, another big market, equipment sales are expected to return to growth in 2014 after 2 years of declines. 8.4% growth is on the cards this year to 60,655 machines. This month's lead business story looks at the proposed merger between Holcim and Lafarge. I think it's fair to say that this is the most significant merger in the industry we've covered for many years.
Definitely. These are the 2 largest cement and aggregates companies in the world, and they're proposing what they describe as a merger of equals through an all-share deal. The nature of that deal is significant and probably a good thing, because there have been a lot of cash mergers and acquisitions in the sector in the past, and that has left a lot of these companies with too much debt, and they've arguably overpaid for some of the companies they've bought. And this merger has been approved by both companies' boards and their core shareholders.
Clearly this would be the biggest materials company in the world, but how big?
Well, huge. The combined company would have revenues in the region of 32 billion euros a year, which is about 44 billion US dollars. Production capacity would be about 427 million tonnes of cement per year, which is about 12% of global demand, and it would have a production footprint in 90 countries around the world.
But the competition implications of this are also a significant problem.
Yes, it's something the 2 companies have played down a little bit, but it's going to be a problem for sure. This is a sector, not just Holcim and Lafarge, but many companies in the cement and aggregates business have had run-ins with competition authorities all over the world. For many years now, it has to be said. There are fewer price-fixing cases these days, but there are a lot of countries that are starting to say there just isn't enough competition in the sector, as a result of all the consolidation that's gone on. And this is something that's being actively pursued or debated in the UK, Spain and Brazil. Now, Holcim and Lafarge, in fairness, have recognised this, and they are planning an asset sale as part of the merger process, and that could see a business with assets of maybe $4 or $5 billion spun off. Now, that's interesting in itself. I mean, who would buy them? Would it be a developed world competitor? Probably not, because of all the competition concerns. But there could be some sort of emerging market upstart, a private equity buyer, or a simple IPO of the businesses. So that's interesting, but a bit of a side issue. But I tend to feel that being proactive about this maybe misses the point. The regulatory issues will be significant. There are lots and lots of territories and countries involved, and some of them are supranational, like the European Union. And the fact is that many regulators clearly already think there isn't enough competition in the cement and aggregates industry, and it's also an industry which frankly has a tarnished reputation for cartel activities. So it's clearly going to take a long time to negotiate these competition issues in every territory, maybe longer than the 15 months that's currently envisaged. One of our features this month looked at equipment design for the global utilities market. What are some of the trends you picked up on here, Helen?
Well, I looked at both sides of the underground utilities business, so that's trenchless operations and open cut jobs, and found that equipment is constantly being refined. Operators are being provided with more information about what's going on in the ground than they ever have before. On the trenchless side, I looked at new HDD technology, or horizontal directional drilling technology, as well as new ways of replacing underground pipes without opening up the ground. Lots of manufacturers in the trenchless sector are saying that these techniques for installing utilities are growing more and more popular. Trenchless techniques have the obvious advantages, like causing less disruption simply by not opening up the ground, less clear-up time, and obviously there's less damage to the environment using this as well.
Having said that, those on the trenching side of the underground utilities market would probably argue that their method is the most popular.
Quite right, and there are advantages and disadvantages on each side, and in fact it entirely comes down to the nature of the job in hand, as you'd expect. In any case, if the job requires the ground to be opened up, it does present contractors with an entirely different array of challenges. So I looked at new trends in trench shoring. This is being caused by the increased use of compact equipment, and that's leading to demand for smaller, lighter trench shoring equipment, for example. I also had a look at new cutting tools that are said to reduce the time it takes to dig a trench. There are lots of developments in terms of technology, and one of the things I think will be most interesting is to see how quickly this advanced technology, which is currently predominantly used across mature markets, spreads and adapts into emerging economies in the coming year. This month's regional report looks at Latin America, where the construction industry remains buoyant despite disappointing GDP growth for the last few years.
Yes, there's very heavy investment in infrastructure in many countries in the region. The most obvious is Brazil, of course, where preparations are underway for the World Cup and the 2016 Olympics. But there's much more to Latin America than just Brazil. Chile, Uruguay and Peru are particularly strong markets. And of course you can't forget about Panama, where the Panama Canal is being expanded. And that's the largest construction project in the world at the moment. And again, there's more going on in Panama than just the canal project. Panama City opened Central America's first metro system earlier this year.
Urban transport, and particularly metro schemes, is something of a theme for the region, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. There are quite a few brand new schemes going in Bogota, the Colombian capital, Lima in Peru, Quito in Ecuador and Panama City. And there's also a fair bit of work going on to expand existing networks in Santiago in Chile, Mexico City and several Brazilian cities as well. There's also still lots of road building going on in the area, but the metro development is something that's linked to a fairly fundamental driver of increased urbanisation, which in fact is a global phenomenon and not just something in Latin America. And it also seems that rail transport is gaining ground in what's historically been quite a road-centric market. There's a plan in Brazil, for example, to build Latin America's first high-speed rail link, which would join Rio de Janeiro with Sao Paulo.
You mentioned the Panama Canal and its expansion. That's a piece of infrastructure that may face competition.
Plans to expand the Panama Canal will see it be able to cope with much bigger vessels. The currency in all of this is the 20-foot equivalent unit container, and at the moment the biggest ships that can use the Panama Canal carry 5,000 TEUs, and the expansion will allow it to take ships up to 13,000 TEUs. Now that's a big leap, but the largest container ships in the world these days are close to 19,000 TEUs, and there also seems to be a general trend towards bigger and bigger ships. So even though the Panama Canal will take much bigger vessels, you can see the trend making that a smaller and smaller proportion of freight as years go on. Now in Guatemala there's an $8 billion plan to build an interoceanic corridor, and that looks a pretty credible rival to the Panama Canal. That would work with ports on either ocean connected by a 370-kilometre train track plus a 4-pipe pipeline for oil and petrochemical products. So there the only limiting factor would be the size of the ports, and at the moment the plans are that these would be able to handle ships as big as 22,000 TEUs. So that's being looked at from the point of view of a PPP or a BOT type of model, but it does have issues. Land is probably the biggest one, as there are an estimated 3,500 landowners on the route, and there's a question about how they'll be compensated. A mixture of cash and shares in the new venture is being talked about. There's also a scheme in Nicaragua which frankly looks a bit less credible. There is a hand-picked Chinese developer called the Hong Kong Nicaragua Canal Development Investment Company, or HKND Group. And the plan for that to build a canal-type crossing across Nicaragua was announced last June after a very controversial vote in the Senate. Now, although that went through, the project seems to have stalled already at the feasibility study stage, with a lot of discussions going on about the route of this canal. So that's it for this month's podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope you'll be back next month, where unfortunately Helen won't be joining us as she moves on to edit one of International Construction's sister magazines, International Rental News. So it'll just be me, but hopefully you'll tune into International Rental News for its podcast as well.